Hello, this is Stephanie.
And this is Brian.
Welcome to our podcast, The Making and the Remaking of a Codependent Mind.
This week we decided we want to revisit another one of the topics we've discussed a few times. We had a whole episode on it in season 1, and that's the subject of shame.
And particularly we're going to focus on a term that we think we invented.
Yeah.
Called shame venting.
Yeah, so that's the main focus. So it's like the interpersonal, more of the interpersonal side of shame, how it comes out in relationships.
Before we start on that topic, though, we would like a future episode to be structured around answering listener questions. So if you have any questions about us, about anything we've talked about in the podcast that maybe hasn't been clear, or more information about a particular experience, please send it in. Our email is codependentmind@gmail.com. And you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching A Codependent Mind.
Yes, and we'll remind again on the next episode of this, and maybe do it 3 episodes, 2 or 3 episodes from now. So, give it a chance to get some questions, and hopefully we get some.
But let's turn our attention now to shame venting.
Mm-hmm.
But as you were saying, let's pull back a little bit and review some of the things that we already talked about in terms of shame.
Right, what we mean by shame. Yeah. It's a word that you hear all the time, of course, but like a lot of terms, it's not always easy to nail down exactly what it is and what the driving force is.
And what the lived experience looks like.
Yeah.
So just on the definitional level, and we outlined this when we did the episode on shame in season 1, I believe. People often put shame as part of this continuum that includes embarrassment and guilt. So these are all emotions that arise from interpersonal or social situations. Mm-hmm. Like, you're not going to be embarrassed if you're just in the woods because no one's watching you.
Yeah, right, true. I mean, it could, I guess, if animals.
Well, I think if you do get embarrassed when there's no people around, you're imagining people there.
Yes,
you're
exactly,
imagining that the animals are people watching you.
Yeah, right.
So embarrassment is an easier one. I think people are pretty clear on what that looks like and what that feels like. We've all experienced it. When you're somehow exposed in public to other people, when they see you in a situation or behaving in such a way or looking in such a way that you feel is not representative of who you are, of what you want.
Or just the image you want to put out of yourself. Or
right.
Something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that would be embarrassment. Mm-hmm. It's kind of exposure.
Yeah, and it's usually pretty temporary. I mean, it could linger, but it's just not that severe, the emotions that go with it.
And then there's guilt. Mm-hmm. So, embarrassment is when you have been exposed and your image is sullied.
Yeah.
Guilt is more about your behavior. So when you have done something you think violates social norms or violates your own norms, and you imagine that other people might find out or you might be punished for this.
Yeah, and so you're like, now you're making the decision, what should I do with this feeling? Do I need to do something about this? Is this legitimate signal that I'm getting here?
Right. Am I guilty of something that needs
am I guilty?
to be...
Yeah.
That needs to be addressed. And so shame kind of takes the two things that are painful about embarrassment and guilt and adds them together because now you feel something wrong or defective has been exposed, but that is you.
Yeah.
It's not it's not just your behavior.
Right.
And it's not just like a temporary image problem. You have been exposed as an unworthy or bad or defective person.
Yeah, and it'll often start from the same exact thing that maybe one particular situation that caused embarrassment or guilt can lead to shame, because now
can intensify into shame.
It's like, wow, okay, not only did I mess up, I'm a mess up.
And we described it in previous episodes, and I think it's true. It's one of the most painful emotions that can be felt.
Yeah, because again, we're a social species, and we rely on each other for the most part to survive.
Absolutely.
And when there's a threat where I feel as though I don't belong or something in this society, that's not a good feeling.
Yeah, I don't belong in this human community. Yeah. I don't belong in this family. I don't belong in this relationship. I'm so kind of defective or worthless. And if that's discovered, then I'm going to be cast out, or it has, or the feeling that it has been discovered and someone now knows this about you.
Yeah, and so
you're always trying to hide. It's so painful.
Right.
but it's not unmanageable.
Yeah, so all of these feelings that we talk about is just if it becomes pathological or ingrained or something, because the shame, it is a signal. It's an evolved signal. And so, yeah, it's okay to go, oh, is there something wrong with me that I need to change? Because, yeah, we're not just this set in stone.
So I remember one time, we were both of us kind of thinking back our experiences with shame. And I remember one time feeling what I think is accurately described as shame. I was moving out of an apartment. I had a child and a dog and a husband. And so it was like my first adult apartment. And so I'd accumulated a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I lived in that place for like 5 or 6 years. In any case, so I arranged for the moving experience, but I kind of did it like it was a move from my early 20s, where I didn't have that much stuff.
Like 15 things.
And you can just get a bunch of friends together and rent a truck. And anyway, it went okay for a while, but then like the friends left because it was getting late and people left, and it was still me and my husband at the time. It was like 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. It was still a bunch of crap. And, the truck was completely packed full and the car was packed full. And we had to leave stuff basically on the street. And there was no one to see it, right? So I don't necessarily need to be embarrassed. But I felt that sense of shame. I just felt like I just failed.
Yeah, right.
And that I was not the person that I thought I was. Like I was incompetent. And
how did I let this happen?
How did I let this happen? That feeling. And that persisted when I would think about it. But, one thing it did is, it was really, it sucked. It felt really bad. Yeah. So it's like, I'm never going to do this again. Like I'm going to learn from this experience so that I never behave that way again. Yeah. And also, like we talked about in other episodes, I wasn't dumping that shame on top of a whole bunch of other shame.
Yeah, sure. Right.
Like I felt pretty good about myself. I had self-esteem. Yeah. So like this one thing wasn't just like, oh, here's one more piece of evidence that I'm a useless person. Right. It was just like, it felt like an aberration, and it felt like an aberration that I could say, I'm never going to do that again.
Yeah. So you didn't have this shame tank that
right.
that was like on full already or something,
right.
Because each time you experienced something like that, you recognized what it was and you did what you needed to do to resolve
process it. Yeah.
Right.
And again, it's not that when I thought back on it, now it's fine. I don't, because it is, I've moved multiple times and I proved to myself that I had learned my lesson and I did it better and stuff like that. Yeah. But for a while when I thought about it, like, oh my God, that was so terrible.
Right. Yeah. But now you remember that story. So it did its job,
Right. Yeah. But if you can't resolve it.
Yeah.
If it goes it's added to your shame tank, as you said, then that pain is always ready to be felt again.
Yeah. It just gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And then it does what we talked about before, this kind of disorganized brain thing where it's just like, I don't really know what's in there, but I just have this feeling that at any moment, one of these things is going to be exposed or, or I'm just going to be reminded of one of these things. That's all it needs to happen. And it would happen constantly.
Right. So some of the things that are harmful when you don't resolve shame, when you just kind of tuck it away somewhere in your emotional structure. You've described kind of what you see now looking back as always having this low level shame anxiety.
Yeah, sure. Right. Just kind of waiting for something to explode at any moment. And it almost always did, because I would just be always reminded of things all throughout the day, just because these things are always just barely under the surface. And
you had to shame about a lot of parts of your life.
Yeah, right. Pretty much every aspect you can think of about my life had some sort of shame attached to it, because, we talked about
your social life and your financial life. And
right. Sexual life, just, everything basically, myself, my image of myself, but the problem is, I didn't spend enough time thinking about this stuff. Again, we'll big picture, this thing we talked about before, is just, it was too difficult for me to really look at myself as a whole. I just had these individual experiences that I was like always trying to shuffle around this shame. Each time one of these things would come up, it'd be like, oh no, put it back over there, put it over there, compartmentalization, that's really what I use compartmentalization for mostly, was to shuffle around shame.
So without that sense of kind of big picture, without that sense of kind of awareness of all the different parts of yourself, it's really hard to develop any sense of knowledge about yourself.
Yeah, right.
And really, it's hard to put together an accurate picture of the world in the ways that we described in other episodes, because anything that might have shame attached to it does not get incorporated into the larger picture.
Yeah, and something we mentioned before, this has this binding effect, and it did kind of bind to everything. So it was difficult to even enjoy things that I enjoyed, because somehow it seemed like shame was always there, ready to kind of take over or pull me away from some kind of enjoyment, or it just always bound to everything.
So those are some of the consequences for you in terms of holding on to unprocessed shame.
Yeah.
And just shuffling it around.
Yeah, basically what it feels like inside. Just kind of like just anxious. And a lot of people would just interpret that as depression or anxiety or something like that. But really it's just like, whoa, lots of shame in here.
But there's also harm to your interpersonal relationships and even kind of harm to others.
The focus of this episode, basically. Yeah. Now we've brought you up to speed again on what we mean by the shame. And, yeah.
Is this shame venting?
Shame venting. Yeah.
We're going to trademark that term. So just venting in general is just some version of complaining.
Nothing inherently wrong with that.
We all do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably not great behavior. And, if you're
especially
around,
if it's excessive.
Yeah, if you're around someone who vents all the time, he's kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
But, certainly, yeah, it can be helpful in small bits. And it comes from, for me, I just get this built up frustration.
Yeah.
And I just need to vent about
I need
my
to say
work,
this out
or I
loud.
just vent about this interaction I had, which just helps me relieve the frustration. And it does enlist you or who I'm venting to as a kind of partner a little bit to resolve this feeling that's been building up.
Yeah, and if you have other good people in your life, these people will probably respond in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, everyone. Again, it's a rare person who doesn't occasionally need to vent.
Yeah.
And usually people are happy enough to receive your venting, again, if it doesn't happen excessively. It's just the occasional vent. So shame venting is the version of that, but what you're venting is not kind of frustration or even resentment, and it's not particularly conscious.
Yeah, right.
So I might come to you at the end of the day, had a couple of bad interactions at work. I need to vent about my work.
Yeah.
But shame venting, you don't even necessarily know you're doing it.
No, right. At least I didn't when we think back and when we came up with this term. Nowadays, I am conscious of it, so it doesn't even happen.
Right. So it's this, what happens when you have a buildup of shame, especially around a certain topic or interaction or relationship.
Yeah.
And you don't know how to process that shame. You don't even really want to recognize it.
Right.
But it has to come out somehow. It can't just keep being added to and added to and
right.
added to.
It gets too full. The tank overflows, basically.
Yeah. So this is kind of like, the shame tank.
Yeah.
I like that.
Or actually the ball, say this, is this ball that's expanding and getting too big, and then it has to be
almost,
vented.
Oh, yeah,
right?
almost like a balloon, right? It's just blowing up and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it can't explode. So you put a little pinhole in it, and
some steam comes
some
out.
steam comes rushing out, and that relieves it shrinks the ball a little bit, and relieves some of that feeling of impending shame.
But in some cases, these shame ventings are pretty bad, and the steam is going in your face.
Steam is going in the face of the other person. Yeah, so it kind of runs the gamut, and so I was trying to think of some examples from the earlier days in our relationship. And one is, you had been seeing a woman for a few months, not very long.
Yeah, not very long.
Right before we met.
Yeah.
And this was before your divorce was final again. And she had ended the relationship, and then we started going out. And when we started going out, you talked a lot about her.
Yeah, for a while.
A lot about that, quote unquote, relationship, which was, again, just kind of
Not
dating for a few months.
Yeah, right.
And then, so for instance, if we went to a place, you would say like, oh, she and I went there, and
Yeah.
you told me like 3 or 4 times where she worked, for instance.
Yeah,
And I was
right.
like, what's up with
Well,
this?
we drive by it. There it is.
That's
There
where
it is
so and
again.
so works. Not as if this first time you were telling me,
Right,
right?
right.
So you had clearly kind of need to talk about it. It didn't seem to me that you were that into her. It didn't seem to you
No.
had feelings. And so this was, it was kind of confusing and a little bit annoying, but it tapered off and more or less. So it was a reasonably benign version of shame venting.
Yeah, there's much worse.
Yeah, and then it was kind of much later where she came up again. And at that point, it was like, you want to maybe think about why you talked about this person so much. Like there seems to be something unresolved there. I don't think it is that you're still in love with this person or something.
Right.
So what is it? What's going on?
Yeah, and it was really difficult. And when you finally did bring it up like that, I got hit with a wave of shame. I totally remember. I mean, so obviously it was like, yeah, interesting that I haven't really thought about this. And so it was like really kind of one of the earliest examples that we could think of that we didn't call it shame venting at the time, but it was like kind of recognizing that that's what was going on. It's like, oh, I think I keep saying this because I just feel shame about that experience. And then talked it through for a good hour or so. And yeah.
Well, I think too, you went, that was when you had started your writing, you went and wrote about it or something. Like, I think
maybe, yeah, it was at the very, very early stages of this whole
because
process.
then you came back and you had a much fuller story about why, what maybe the shame was coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was just this variety of things where, for one thing, it was, so we've talked about how we got together on the tail end of this J experience. And this was also at the tail end because it's almost the exact same time we met. It was literally like that ended a few months
before. Yeah.
Right before we met. And so it was a similar situation. Jay still had access to me.
She was
still very controlling.
Yeah,
and controlling the whole end of the relationship and the house and all this kind of stuff. And I had a lot of shame about that. And I was voicing my resentments like constantly to this woman, right? And eventually she's just like, wow, this is why you with this person, kind of like what we went through, but in her case, it was like, screw this, like, and so, yeah, I think I was probably shame venting to her also. But also on top of that, though, just the way that relationship started and was starting to take shape was similar to my previous ones too, where I wasn't attracted to her. She came onto me. And it was like I had the same kind of feeling as it's like, why am I here? This isn't right, but what am I going to do? And this person chose me.
And I'm failing to be a good partner because I'm not really that physically attracted to her.
Right. And also I think I was starting to recognize how my complaining was a little excessive and stuff like that too. There was just this kind of...
I think you revealed too much about the actual relationship.
Right. Yeah. So
with Jay, and you kind of learned your lesson with me.
I know.
Not the lesson you should have learned, but you essentially kind of did more disguise about.
Well, and this is where I said once in this podcast, where it's like, oh, I was just saying the bad stuff. That's where that came from. Like, so that's the lesson I learned was like, oh, she didn't like the way I dealt with the relationship with Jay, but it was only because I was saying all the bad stuff. I didn't say anything, but there was no good stuff. I was just saying stuff, which was all bad.
I know. So, but when you got to me, you were kind of like, oh, I can't talk.
Yeah,
about
I better stay quiet about this. But eventually,
eventually it came out
anyway. Yeah.
So, I mean, that would be an example of shame venting, somewhat benign. But there were other examples for sure where you would shame vent, and it wasn't benign towards me. No. Especially if it was involved our relationship or my body or our intimate life, all of which kind of happened because you had a lot of shame around relationships and intimacy. And,
all of it unresolved.
All of it unresolved. Yeah. So sometimes you would resolve it by oversharing or too much information.
Right.
And it would be information that I was not prepared to receive and I did not want to hear about.
Yeah. So either it was like this one we just talked about, which was like not even provoked, right? It would just be like I'd see something and go, oh, that's where this person and I used to do this or whatever. And or it would be triggered by something like so something would happen and
between the two of us, for instance.
Between the two of us, and I would feel an overwhelming rush of shame, and then there goes the vent.
There goes the vent. Yeah.
But the vent is basically I have no idea what I'm saying. Like I'm not actually trying to process anything. It's consciously trying to process anything. This is useless, just drivel that's coming out of my mouth that is not that not only is it not useful or accurate, it's harmful.
And you're not at all aware of who you're saying it to,
Yeah.
how they might receive it,
Hmm.
how they might feel about that piece of information.
Yeah.
It's all about relieving your own sense
Right.
of shame. Although we were kind of talking about this in terms of shame venting around narcissists, because you would shame vent around everyone.
Right.
Because again, you were not socially aware in those
Yeah, I
situations.
had no idea that's what I was doing, obviously. Yeah.
I think that narcissists are kind of scanning the landscape
They're
for
looking
these
for
kind
that.
of shame vents,
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
Because it's also giving information to people,
Mhm.
and you don't know what they're going to do with that information.
Right.
This kind of oversharing, TMI, and like it's often saying something about your personal, private, intimate life
Yeah.
to people that may make them feel uncomfortable, or you could be giving it to people who are going to then use it
Yeah.
to manipulate you, which
Right.
which happened to you.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense that because narcissistic people are they need to be superior. They need to be right. They need to be, from my experience, R and J, always looking for the upper hand, always looking for some way to be superior. And me just handing over this embarrassing information about myself, or
Right, almost from the first day.
these are my insecurities.
Yeah,
Here you go.
This is what I feel ashamed about. I feel ashamed
Yeah.
about this. I mean, it's just popping up. It doesn't affect them
Right.
because they're like, oh, nice. I'm going to put that
Right.
in my pocket. And
Other than just like, oh, this person has too much insecurity. Like, I don't want to be in a relationship with somebody with this much insecurity or something. That's what maybe a healthy person would say.
or they would say, why is this person telling me all about his like troubles and past sex life and
Yeah.
embarrassing details on the first date?
Yeah.
Like, why is he doing that? And when you're doing it because the situation causes these shame fans, and,
Yeah.
and the narcissists kind of encourage that,
Yeah.
because again,
Right,
it gives
yeah.
them more information. But yes, yeah, right. If you're on a more kind of balanced, healthy person, they're going to be,
Yeah.
what am I supposed to be
Like,
doing
yeah,
with this
why are you
information?
telling me this?
Why are you
Right.
telling me this right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And I recognize it a lot more often now just with other people when I just am overhearing people, or people are talking to me or something, and I go, ooh, that seems like that person may be shame venting. Like, it's just kind of just more obvious. And I think a lot of people have some shame, at least some. And a lot of people have a lot of shame.
Absolutely.
And like we talked about with the narcissistic people, they're driven by shame too. I think it's we've talked about before that it's kind of can be a similar start to these personality disorders, codependency and narcissism, but then they just diverge in a different way. But still driven by shame. It's just like, I need their need to feel superior is to cover up shame, probably for the most part. But yeah, that's what I was doing regularly because I had no other way to resolve it, really, So just let some steam out every now and then,
Regardless of
where I am
you
who I'm
are
talking
and
to.
who you're talking to.
Yeah, and what the subject is, and not taking just one or two steps back to look at the big picture and just go, because I would read your reaction, say, in these things, go, wow, I said something bad here, like this was not good, like, but why did I say it? I have no idea.
Right.
I wouldn't be able to figure it out.
Right, and you just now feel more shame.
Yeah, right.
Because
Now
you
I have
would have
another layer
hurt
of
me.
shame. Yeah, and then there's other things that would take place, like the reflexive dishonesty that we've also talked
Right.
about.
So shame venting was one way to deal with this feeling of unresolved shame, but then just lying.
Yeah. So this is a more conscious version of, and it took me a really long time to admit how conscious really probably most of my lying was. It was just the fact that I so quickly covered it up because there's shame that comes from lying.
Right. It was not unconscious, but it was habitual.
Habitual, yeah.
So you didn't have to plan it out. You just did it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just like
we talked about this in another episode. You were so practiced at it
Yeah.
that you just did it. So
the whole
almost.
process was pretty quick. Yeah. So there's the initial like, shame came up, can't deal with this. Quick lie, whatever the quickest lie I can think of that just makes the whole situation sound better, not as bad. Like I just need to make myself look not as bad. But then I instantly feel shame from the fact that I just consciously lied. So now I have to figure out a way to cover that up. Is what I said partially true at least? Like, is it, just some kind of cleanup effort?
Yes.
And then now the cleanup effort becomes the story, and then the lie that I told becomes the story. But then it's still impossible to keep track of that crap because it's not the truth.
Right.
So now I'm just keep throwing stuff into the ball, into the tank.
Yeah, and we mentioned that we had text records you had text records, and there were including text records between us, which were very helpful because I'd be able to say, that's not how you described that situation. You said exactly the opposite. And then you would go back and like, I said
geez.
exactly
Okay, I lied.
That was a lie. That was clearly a lie because
right.
that's not the way it was happening. Yes. Yeah. So that's not a great strategy either. I mean, these are all not great strategies for actually resolving shame.
No.
And then having all this unprocessed shame was a real block to intimacy for us because one, we have these kind of unpleasant interactions like these shame venting where it starts to feel unsafe for me.
Yeah.
Right. When am I going to get blasted with this shame? And then your inability to explain the bigger picture of yourself, like to say, well, this is why I said it. Or, this is what happened in this relationship. And for that to be true, I mean, that was very difficult because anything that was potentially shameful about any of those situations, you would leave out of the story.
Yeah.
And the parts of yourself that you had attached shame to, you would edit out. Intimacy being knowing another person, what that person doesn't know themselves. It's really hard to...
That combined with just a major lapse in trust. I mean, just like, what am I getting here? Like, so not only has this person, we've discovered these conscious lies, even if they're unconscious, doesn't matter, lies are lies. But also just, does he even know himself at all to begin with? So it's like...
And maybe we should have said this early on. A lot of the shame, the vast majority of the shame you were carrying was not legitimate.
Right.
It was not warranted.
Right. Yep.
It was for things that you should not have to be ashamed about.
Right. Sure.
Including the abuse in your childhood, the depression and the anxiety and the difficulty dealing with social interactions that resulted from that. Any kind of lack of experience that then resulted from that social anxiety. I mean, all of that stuff is not shameful. It just felt shameful.
It felt shameful, but these were also signals that were I wasn't listening to these signals. So the ones that were shameful, those relationships with R&J and things like that, those were shameful. So
you had this unprocessed shame that wasn't warranted. You didn't know what to do with it. So you just, again, compartmentalized it, pushed it away. Then when behavior came along or situations came along that were shameful, there was not a signal you could receive.
Yeah, so it felt the same.
It gets added to the same pile of garbage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so all I know is that anytime... So I was afraid. I was terrified of shame because if it did go too far, it would be the most severe, awful feeling.
It feels like an existential threat.
Yeah.
The times that you have felt suicidal.
Yeah, it came from shame.
It came from shame.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. Yeah, so that's trying to avoid that, just... So when I had these reflexive dishonesty moments or the shame venting or whatever, it's just like, I'm feeling it, I'm starting to feel it's a shame trigger, like we're talking about. Just anything that was a shame trigger. Any sort of other trauma trigger was bad enough. Those, I'm getting anxious and I'm fight flight, but shame was triggers are 10 times worse. I found, as far as like now my whole being is crumbling. So yeah, it makes sense that I would try to avoid that the second I feel it.
Or vent it.
Yeah. But then until like we talked about in I think the second episode of season 2, I had to learn how to be okay with those signals. To go, okay, wait, is this a legitimate feeling? If yes, then do something about it.
Right. So because we were talking about this short relationship that you had right before me. It was nothing shameful.
Right. No. It could have gone that direction, obviously, because that's the thing. It was starting like the other relationships did.
Yeah, I mean, the problems that you were getting signals, and you just interpret them as shame signals, and you interpret them as there's something wrong with me. I'm not attracted to this person, but she wants to be in a relationship with me. There's something wrong with me. There's something inadequate and shameful about me. Not the signal being like, I don't want to be in a relationship with this person. That's perfectly fine.
Right. Yeah.
So learning how to let those signals through and interpret them.
Yeah.
And also to recognize when you're shame venting.
Or about to shame vent, really. Because when was the last time you remember me actually doing it?
I was thinking about that. I don't remember that.
I think because I'm feeling the shame before it gets to a vent. And my tank is not full.
Your tank is not full.
Not even
but
close.
Also, if you're feeling shame, you can do what you were just describing. You can think about like, is this an actual legitimate shame?
Yeah.
Am I violating my own sense of personhood
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah.
And if you're not, because shame is really kind of letting yourself down
Yeah.
in such
right.
a way. I mean, it's a betrayal of yourself.
Yeah. It's kind of like when we talk about boundaries, it's like really more about like not honoring yourself as opposed to society or, other people.
So if it's in a situation in which you yourself are not betraying your own values, where's the shame? Yeah. So now if you start to feel that expanding ball of shame,
Mm-hmm.
you can process it and resolve it rather than just vent it.
Yeah. Because I still, even though I say my tank is not full, there's still some shame in there because all of this stuff, I was carrying this for over 40 years, So when we were talking about this episode, we were taking a walk around this park the other day, and I was like, ooh, uh-oh, it's like starting to fill up again, like just talking about this stuff.
Right. Yes.
But yeah, but I know that's what I'm feeling, and I'm able to just go, okay, what do I do with that? This stuff happened. This stuff is there. So it's like, do I understand it? How can I explain it? What do I know about it? How does it fit into my overall big picture of myself and all that? That's what I do now, as opposed to in the past where it's just like, oh, I'm feeling something. I don't even know it's shame, know?
Vent. Fly.
Right. So yeah, we were coming up with all kinds of bizarre ones that I said over the years.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah. Do you remember this? Ooh, yeah.
So that's shame venting.
Yeah.
Be interested to hear from anyone if they recognize themselves or recognize that behavior in people that they're around. If they think that's a useful term.
Yeah.
And again, if you have any specific questions for us that you'd like us to answer in a future episode, please email us or contact us on Facebook or Instagram.
And we very much appreciate follows, likes, comments.
We read them all. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode.